Hey guys, Axelmyth back again with another totally rad video. Recently, and by recently I mean back in May, my wife bought an entire box of NES games. And it even came with a bunch of PS2 games. It was a seriously great find. One of legendary status. I wanted to do something with them. And I wanted to try them all. But I don't play a lot of NES games, and when I do, I normally don't even play it on the system. I'll usually opt for like the Switch Online service or whatever. But not today. Today I decided to play every single NES game I own for 1 hour, and 1 hour only. And just talk about the experience I had with each of them. I mean, NES games are pretty easy to pick up and play anyway. And by the time the hour is done, you pretty much know everything the game has to offer, unlike the games of today. Playing Baldur's Gate for 10 hours and still barely even past the beginning. I need to preface, there will be a couple rules here. One, I will not be looking at the Nintendo Switch Online games, as I don't physically own those, obviously, and then this video might as well be about that service in general. 2, I will not be looking at NES compilations, as that would include 6 more Mega Man games, and this video took long enough to make. And 3, as much as I would love to, I will not be showing off the downloaded content off my 3DS, as I have no way to actually record those. Now, without any further ado, let's hook this thing up. Super Pitfall Activision. I'm not quite sure what to do here, but it seems like some sort of Metroid game. I don't really know for sure. It's definitely a platformer though. All I could really do was find some treasure and fall down deeper into the level. In terms of gameplay, it looked like they wanted to get on the Super Mario bandwagon. The character even looks like Mario a little bit. I'm not liking the look of this game. It honestly looks like a video game some anime made up because they couldn't get the Mario license or whatever. It just doesn't scroll as smoothly as other platformers. This game is just too buggy to be good anyway. You have to be so precise to hit anything, and sometimes my weapon just flat out went through the creatures. Probably needed some more time in the cooker. I don't think this one is worth coming back to though. Karnov by Data East. I don't know how else to describe the gameplay other than this is a Ghosts and Goblins clone. Being so, this wore on my patience pretty thin. I only got to level 3 before my hour was up. On the bright side of this game, the levels are pretty short and it has unlimited continues. But on the other hand, this one also seems to have some bugs, just not as bad as Super Pitfall. So if you have more patience than I do, this one might be worth trying to finish. Tecmo Bowl by, well, Tecmo. I can say with confidence that video game football isn't for me. I don't know teams very well, so I went with the team nearest to me, Chicago. During gameplay, I only understood what was going on like half the time, and when I felt like I was getting the hang of it, the computer still won. My first game wasn't too bad for a first-timer, but then I figured out I'd try my home state, and someone must have had it out for Indiana, because this team felt slower than the Chicago team. Oh, and to rub it in my face, that's exactly who the computer chose. I lost horribly that time. Like, the CPU just kept intercepting me. I'm not gonna lie, I kept playing, but I sort of gave up caring at that point. Nobunaga's Ambition by Koei. This is as strategy RPG as strategy RPGs get. I don't know much about this series, but apparently it's about overthrowing people to unify Japan or something. You choose which sector you are, and that gives you the leader to play as. I didn't figure out everything, but the goal is to conquer the map sorta like Risk. Except it's a little more in-depth with different resources to use. I couldn't figure out how to make money or boost morale among my troops, unfortunately. I think for a first-time playthrough, making it as far as I did wasn't too horribly bad. I lasted 3 years, and only lost because I decided to go to war with the neighbors. And I only did that because I was running out of money, and any option I chose wouldn't really let me do anything else. I only sort of knew what kind of game this was upon booting because I watched a video of a similar video game for the Sega Saturn, funnily enough. This is definitely a big brain person type game. Would be interesting to see how far I would have made if I had not screwed it up, though. Destiny of an Emperor by Capcom. An RPG which reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy, but looks sorta like Dragon Quest. At least the character sprites do. The story takes place in the Han Dynasty of China, and the kingdom has been taken over by a group of rebels called the Yellow Scarves. This RPG is a bit different from the others, though. Instead of HP, each character you have represents an army. Attack is pretty self-explanatory, tactics work sorta like your magic, and so on. Interestingly, there's an all-out attack which sees every character on screen duke it out. I can see the use of this to make battles go faster. Even on the fast pace, the combat is really slow. This one honestly caught my interest more than I thought it would. Who knows, maybe I might return to this one later. But I'll leave it at my hour for now. Jordan vs. Bird 1-on-1. Electronic Arts. Hey, this one's made by EA Games. Though it was produced by Milton Bradley. Sadly though, that's about the most interesting thing about this game, despite how many modes there are. It's one-on-one basketball, but it controls like a fighting game, I guess? We'll come back to that. There's a regular one-on-one basketball mode where I couldn't get a hoop in much, and it was even worse when I tried playing Bird. I figured out in this mode, and also play until 11 or 15 mode, that if you're Jordan and you're in the center of the circle and press up A, you will slam dunk the ball pretty much every time. I got frustrated with these main modes because if I tried scoring without dunking it, it would say I was traveling. It would also penalize me for blocking when the CPU would do the exact same thing almost every time. Then there's follow the leader, which is pretty self-explanatory. Do as the CPU does. This is where I think it plays like a fighting game where different button combinations give you different slam dunks or something. I couldn't really figure that one out. Lastly, there's 3-point mode where you just shoot hoops rapid fire style. It's honestly really simple and probably where I found most of what you would call enjoyment. You press the A button to jump and be at the right time to shoot the ball, and hopefully you make it in. This one qualifies as my favorite mode, but that's really not saying much. Not gonna lie, at least with Tecmo Bowl, I started enjoying myself at some point where I sort of had a desire to get good, but I just didn't enjoy one bit of this game. This game had me raging so much, I actually broke the shell of one of my controllers. I really try not to be that gamer, but seriously, I cannot understate how much I was just not having a good time with it. If I were rating these, this would be bottom F tier. Ivan Ironman Stewart Super Off-Road by Trade West. That is one heck of a title. An isometric racing game on the NES. This one can actually go up to 4 players, interestingly enough. This is obviously an arcade game brought to home, which isn't a bad thing. It actually looks pretty good. No matter who you choose, you play as the pink car / the red guy, and all you have to do is try to make it in the first place. After every race, you get points to upgrade your car. The controls aren't terrible, though there were a couple times I ended up against the wall and the car turned in a direction I didn't want because of it. And there were a bunch of times I turned into a wall because I couldn't tell if I had passed a corner yet or not. But it honestly feels like controlling an RC car, if that makes any sense at all. I honestly found this game to be pretty fun. Double Dribble by Konami. This is yet another basketball game. This game was pretty frustrating because the CPUs would dunk perfectly, and I would struggle too. And pushing people would seemingly happen at random, despite them being closer to me on occasion as well. This one's not nearly as bad as Jordan vs. Bird, but this game isn't great. I did end up winning in the end though, and that felt pretty good. But it just boots you out to the main menu. This is one they definitely expected you to only play with friends, because this game has 0 content. Only 4 teams, which really only means different colors. I would say overall, I didn't like this game, but I did have some fun with it. Adventure of Lolo, HAL Laboratory. Hey, this one was the creators of Smash Brothers. A puzzle game where your girlfriend is stolen by a devil, and you have to rescue her by completing puzzles throughout the castle. Though I wish the second puzzle gave you more of a hint what to do, I sat there for about what felt like 15 minutes or so trying to figure out what to do. And since I'm only playing these games for like an hour, that's a lot of time to waste. I also didn't realize how short this game is. See, the setup is 4 puzzles per level. If my memory is correct, there's 8 floors to this castle. And after I beat the second puzzle, I made it to level 4 pretty fast. There is unlimited continues, and a game over doesn't start you at the beginning of a level or whatever. It'll put you back at the puzzle you were on. The downside of this game is that there is no replayability. That and some of these puzzles can take a while to set up, and one slightly wrong move can make you have to restart the entire puzzle. But this game is awesome, and it's super cool that there's 3 of these on the NES. I only have 1 though. Baseball Stars 2. ROM Stars. These sports games are going to be the death of the video. This is a baseball game, and it just lets my catchers catch the ball at random, and it doesn't actually like it when I hit the ball. It ends up right into the computer's hands almost every time. And why is it when I have to chase the ball, my guys are so incredibly, agonizingly slow? Other than that, this does seem to be a pretty in-depth game with different players on the team having their own stats and stuff. I wish I can blame my downfall on not being a sports type of guy, but baseball is a sport I actually kind of like. I feel so seriously done with these sports titles at this point. I guess if anything, I was able to get one of these 2 baseball games working. I don't know what happened to Bases Loaded by Jellicoe, but I just could not get that one working. Legend of the Wizard by Broader Bund. This game is more my style. This is a platformer, more in the style of a Mega Man game, except you do not have unlimited ammo or magic to work with. This is also that open world style Metroid type or Pitfall game. That does mean I couldn't figure out what to do or what I was working towards. You have 5 playable characters to work with, one of which seems to be a pet dragon. The really cool thing about this is that they each have different attributes. I prefer the 3rd character I tried where she was weaker, but she could jump really high. And that pet dragon I mentioned, he's probably the slowest and runs out of magic very easily, but he's invulnerable to enemies. I say the only real downside of this game is that it isn't really a looker. Oh, and a password. But I think it more makes up with that in the gameplay area. I would honestly go as far to say this is a hidden gem. Gauntlet 2 by Atari. I am actually pretty familiar with this franchise. I remember playing Gauntlet Dark Legacy on the GameCube with my family a whole lot back in the day. This Gauntlet is a maze crawler that also is a top-down shooter. So right from the start, the graphics are pretty primitive even for NES standards. I judge that based on I can barely tell what most of these things are supposed to be. The gameplay is really fun and holds up surprisingly well. Trying to collect all the things in a level, debating whether or not it's worth life energy and sometimes resources. Though this game has a hard-on for those hooded figures, the deaths. They're everywhere and introduced pretty early in the game. And say what you want about the chip voice, but I found it to be really impressive for the NES hardware. I like this game so much, I gave it a few extra minutes just to see what the wizard looked like. Give me an afternoon with absolutely nothing else to do, and I could see myself trying to get lost in this game. Speaking of liking things, maybe you should like this video. Rad Racer, Squaresoft. This game is surprisingly good. Surprisingly holds up well to this day and age. It's weird to say, but Rad Racer just feels so right to control. You get to pick between a race car and an F1 race car. The race car feels a little slower, but is a lot easier to control. The F1 feels way faster, but a bit more slippery. I wasn't able to get very far, unfortunately, but this game is so addicting that I only really started getting frustrated because I was playing this game for 2 hours straight, because I forgot to record for the first hour. It's just so cool to see all the things fly by you. It really gives off that like you're in a 3D space despite it only being a 2D game. It's so good that I would argue it's easier to tell your relation to other objects than it is in the original Super Mario Kart. My only real complaint is the first stage is going to be burned in my corneas for a while now. San Francisco is much better on the eyes. Bad Dudes by Data East. Are you bad enough? This video game screams the late 80s or early 90s. The goal of this beat 'em up is to free the kidnapped president of the USA from ninjas. At first I thought it was going to be one of those games where I couldn't get anywhere but have to play the same stage for an hour, but I soon figured out how this game works, and even was able to come up with a few strategies against the bosses. This game doesn't look very good, and it scrolls pretty weirdly. The background scrolls pretty smoothly, but the character himself seems to be chugging along. Probably because of all that testosterone. The names are pretty funny too. You get to play as Blade and Staker? I don't know if that was some kind of typo, but maybe this bad dude just really liked his steaks. Ribeye, T-bone, it doesn't matter. He'll eat them all. Anyway, that's the guy you want. Blade is just too slow. He's not nearly cool enough for the ninjas. This is a pretty plain beat 'em up though. There's no real combos to pull off, it seems. I was able to do a flying Street Fighter kick though. I don't exactly know how close I got to the end, but I did get to level 4. I'm bad. You got that right, game. You sure got that right. Blades of Steel by Konami. This is a hockey game. Like baseball, I'm more familiar with the sport of hockey. I did a couple practice rounds and then decided to do a tournament. Of course, I picked the Junior League, and I'm not gonna lie, I would hate to see what this game looks like on a Wii U. It's pretty dark for some reason, and I don't think that's my capture device. But also, some of the teams, namely Chicago, Minnesota, and Montreal, look very similar. It's pretty hard to tell these teams apart, especially at fast speeds. I did have more fun with this sports title than the other ones. I still don't think I really figured this game out all the way, but unlike the other sports games, I felt like I was starting to understand it. I even won the tournament against New York. I even got credits, which was sort of a surprise. None of the other sports games really did that for me. It's always really cool when a voice sounds good on the NES. Ikari Warriors 2 SNK. I originally thought this video game was trying to pass off as a sequel to Ikari Warriors. From what I remembered from the AVGN episode, this looked nothing like the first game at all. I don't really know what Ladybugs, the Count's crazed cousin, or these other Muppet rejects have to do with Ikari Warriors, but I guess here we are. In all seriousness, this is a really slow shooter, and it just does not look that good. I can't tell if it's slow because the game is slow paced or if the NES is just chugging along. I could barely tell that I was hitting the bosses. It took me a half an hour to remember the code ABBA to revive myself, but once I did, it told me, no, this is an actual SNK game for the NES. What the hell, man? And it was also pretty smooth sailing for the most part from there. In the hour, I got to the fourth world, where the snake fight just took forever. My main issue with this game is that it's almost impossible to beat without getting hit. Once you die, you lose all the weapons you picked up, meaning that the store's extra weapons and ladybug coins around the map are utterly useless. Metroid, Nintendo. The first Nintendo game I'm actually looking at this point. I mean, who doesn't know this one? But hey, someone wrote passwords on the back of this cartridge. Let's check them out in a minute. Honestly, how many times am I gonna look at this game? This is a side-scrolling open-world game, sort of. You have no inkling what to do or where you're going. It's up to you to figure that out. Like with Super Pitfall, I can see that there's a charm to this type design, but this game is just too punishing to actually enjoy. I was able to get a missile upgrade and an energy tank in the time I spent, which, that's not the problem itself. The problem is that I can barely make it anywhere else without getting killed. Quite frankly, I got really frustrated that you'd start out with so little health. And want to know what's not fun? Farming for health after every time you power on the game, and proceed to die and do it over again. I honestly feel unaccomplished by getting the upgrades I did get, because when I start again, my health is back to being so low again. One of the passwords on the back fixes a little bit of my frustration, giving Samus unlimited missiles and ice beams. And the other is the Zero Suit Samus cheat code. I honestly think these are pretty common codes to use, but hey, it's still cool. I wonder if anyone's done a Zero Suit Samus run of this game. Track and Field 2 Konami. This is a bunch of sports in one. Honestly, this NES game is not lacking in any content. It honestly reminds me of Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games series. They all honestly look really decent too. Unfortunately, most of these games just press A as fast as you can, then hit B at the appropriate time. Seriously, my right hand was hurting so bad by the end of it. I guess you're supposed to score well enough, then you move on to the next game. There's fencing. If I were playing Olympic, this would be much harder, but I found this to be a little too easy. Reminded me of the fighting segments from Blades of Steel from earlier. Triple jump, I couldn't figure this one out entirely, but when you get up to speed, you have to press certain buttons fast enough, let go, press again to get the best distance. Freestyle swimming, this one pretty much came down to pressing A as fast as you can and try not to let your meter get low. Clay pigeon shooting, I really like this one. I think it was the funnest out of all of these. Almost should have been a game of its own. Perhaps with a peripheral of its own. Oh wait, it was. But seriously, this was pretty fun. Hammer throw. You have to press B to throw the hammer at the correct time, and I couldn't figure out what the right time was. I didn't have a lot of time to do every single game more than once or twice. Taekwondo. This one reminded me of a fighting game on the NES. Unfortunately, it's pretty unpolished, so all you really have to do is kick your opponent until he's down. Pole vault. You have to stab the stick in the ground at the correct time to catapult yourself over a certain height. This one is pretty simple, but the timing is very precise. Canoeing. Get through all the flags in the numbered order. I think you have to straighten out when you go through them also, because there were a bunch of them I know I crossed, but it still gave me a penalty for it. The other thing I can think of is this game is just inconsistent. Archery. This weirdly reminded me of some sort of golf game. You have to pay attention to the wind, the height, the angle, the power of the bow. It sounds more complicated than it really is. But I kinda like this one. Hurdles. This is just a running platformer. I won this one every time I played it. Horizontal bar. This one I couldn't really figure out at all. At first I thought you just press B at the correct time after getting the power bar at a certain point, but then that didn't work the second time I played it. But supposedly you can make him do tricks. I can't say I cared for most of these though. There's only 4 games on here that I think are worth playing. I didn't do Olympic mode for my own state of mind. I probably wouldn't have been able to see the rest of the game if I did. Adventure Island by Hudson Soft. From the makers of Mario Party comes a decent port of an arcade platformer. In this game you play as a caveman with a trucker hat and a mustache. The goal is to get to the end without getting hit, but on top of that you have a meter for hunger, so you need to get the fruit around the stage, otherwise poor Cave Stash will starve. Apparently melons are Cave Trucker's favorites, with carrots being his second favorite. This game rewards you for going fast, but you have to be careful because danger is looming just to the right of you always. The physics are pretty weird, and if you try to play this like a Mario game, you're sure to meet some humble pie. The vibe of this game gives off a lot of Toriyama's Dr. Slump feelings, and I'm down for that. It's pretty challenging, but fun. I could barely make it past stage 2. I did make it to stage 3 a few times, but I couldn't get past this icy part. It's honestly frustrating staring at the beginning every time. I wish there was a stage select or something to see more of it. Super Strike V-Ball Technos Japan. I don't think they wanted their name attached to this one, because their name's not on the cart. In all seriousness, I picked this one up pretty fast considering it's a sports title, and I will attest it's a good game. You just have to walk up, press A to bunt, B, then A when it's time to spike. It seems to have unlimited continues, at least in the American tour. I only got to the 3rd game against Chicago. A couple of the tries only got as far as I did because the CPU kept hitting the ball out or messing up in some sort of way. I was really frustrated with this game, but I did have a lot of fun with it. It's pretty cool that this could even go to 4 players. Ninja Gaiden Tecmo. Crazy to think that the same people who made the football game made this one. I actually had trouble getting this game started at first. I don't think that's the game's fault though. Glad I got it working. This game looks fantastic, and it's got some really cool looking cutscenes. I've heard so much about this game, I'm surprised that there wasn't a movie based off of this back in the 90s. This game starts out pretty decent, but then it goes throw your console hard about when these stupid birds come in. Like, it was hard before, but I felt like it was nothing I couldn't handle, especially since this game does have unlimited continues. Then I couldn't get past a certain stage. You definitely need more than an hour to beat this one, and more patience than I do. I just think that the sword's hitbox is inconsistent sometimes, and on occasion it wouldn't hit enemies and left me open to my death. Also, it's pretty annoying you can't just climb ladders. You have to jump off them first. But hey, I'd say this is still a pretty good game. Pinball by Nintendo. I thought this was a breakout clone from the cartridge. But no, in fact, this is just virtual pinball. I love pinball though. I'm not a pro or anything. Just a casual player. I do think it doesn't quite capture real life physics, but it's close enough. At least if you play it on the B game. Game A is slower and probably easier. I honestly thought it made the game harder though. But this is honestly a really good game of pinball, if a bit plain. Unfortunately, it is one of those games I probably didn't have to spend the entire hour on, but it's hard not to when Mario's holding you at gunpoint. It's hard to get mad at pinball. The only issue is when the ball falls off because of the table's physics and how it ends up throwing the ball around. It's extra fun because Mario makes a cameo, and he's saving who I assume is Princess Toadstool. I honestly would have liked to see a bit more Nintendo references on here. It was 1985, so it would have been limited, but I'm sure they could have added Donkey Kong and the Ice Climbers and possibly the Balloon Guy. Rad Racer 2 Squaresoft. I had so much trouble getting this one started. Even when I got it working, there were weird glitches like the sound fading louder and lower, and it crashed at least twice. I'm thinking I need to get my system looked at. Anyways, the sequel to one of the best driving games on the NES. And it lives up to the title. It looks better than the original. The steering seems a bit too loose and the brakes are a little too tight, but it's nothing you can't get used to. I also think the distance is a little harder to see in this game. I can't tell if that's because the cars are bigger or because they're trying to emulate a lower camera angle. My one actual complaint is no continues though, so every time you lose you have to go back to the beginning. After the 5th time, it gets really old. I know that there's a way to start from where you left off because I tried using the Konami code one time just for the hell of it, and I started back on race 2 again. But it never happened again after that. But after almost an hour of racing, I did finally manage to get to the 3rd track. I was liking the difference in scenery when I lost. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by Ultra. This one sticks out in my mind as the subject of an AVGN episode. I'm not gonna lie, I see why. Don't get me wrong, this game looks great, but there's just some serious flaws in the game design here. Out of all of these games, this is the one where I couldn't get past stage 1. At some point I figured out the different turtles need their own strategies to tackle these stages, which sounds cool in theory. Plenty of games do this. Leonardo has the best and most normal range, but his weapon doesn't do a lot of damage, which is just irritating. Raphael's side don't have any range, but they hit pretty okay. But that doesn't matter if you can't hit anything. Michelangelo's nunchucks have about as good a range as Leo's, but once again, barely does a thing to the bigger enemies. Donatello's bow staff is hard to hit anything, but it packs one heck of a punch and it has the best range. But it doesn't matter if you can't hit things on the ground very well, which is where most of the enemies seem to be sometimes. But honestly, if it's not Leonardo or Donatello, you might as well restart the game. because it's almost impossible with the other two characters. I wish I could only play as Leo with better swords, because it just doesn't seem to work very well. But something that made it so I couldn't beat stage 1 is how slow the turtles are compared to everything and how giant your hitbox is. I seriously got hit by this boar and he's not even that close to me. Kirby's Adventure by HAL Laboratories or Nintendo, whatever. I've always known the Kirby franchise and I've casually played a few of the games here and there. This second game is a great platformer. I did miss Kirby's little hats when he absorbs abilities, though. That would come a game or two later. There's actually quite a few of them, a lot more than I thought for the NES title. I thought the stage design might be a little too simple at times. Seriously, sometimes it's just a room with one enemy. But this game is very chill for the most part. The most challenging things I faced were the bosses, and the ones that I faced never felt that horrible. The main thing is the controls. Kirby just feels a little too loosey-goosey here. And there were times where I had trouble getting him to face the correct way. I honestly think I love this game though. Super Mario Bros. By Nintendo. I pretty much have always grown up around this game, and a decade ago I even tried to beat this one and got really close. It's sort of funny though, I don't think I realized how short this first Mario game is. Even when you don't use warps. This 1 hour was almost an entire playthrough. But this is one of the best platformers on the NES right here. This is back before save files, but I like how, if you know where all the warps are at least, it's almost no problem getting back to where you were. Still a frustrating route to go, but hey, it's more than what Sonic has. It's a little rough in terms of looks, but it doesn't look that bad either. Coming back to this one, Mario seems pretty sluggish comparatively, but this game still holds its fun, despite how simple it is. One memory I have of this game as a child is me and my family were in like this 50s styles diner. Elvis was on the walls, silver bar stools were all around with the booths, and for some reason they had the arcade version of Super Mario Bros. My dad and I decided to play it, and I died sorta quickly. My dad's advice was to get as many coins as possible to build up lives for later. And that's pretty much how I've tried to play this game since. Duck Hunt, also by Nintendo. The game that's pretty synonymous with Super Mario Bros. Unfortunately, this game really isn't available in this day and age due to the TV's refresh timing. I feel like when people play this game for the internet, they usually rely on an emulator with a mouse, or they don't really show footage of this game. So I figured I would take it old school for this one. I still have the sound hooked up to my capture device though for the best sound quality I could get. Anyway, actually getting this game is a really fun light gun shooter. There's 3 games here. Game A is targeting just 1 duck, Game B is targeting 2 ducks, and Game C is clay pigeons. I personally think Game C is the best to look at, but I can't deny how iconic the dog and duck are. Little bugger quit laughing at me. At first I didn't know if my zapper was actually working or not, but no, it turns out I just suck. About 2/3 of the way through, I figured it out though. Boy, do these ducks get really fast though. My only complaint is that this game does get a little boring due to the lack of content here. I'd even say different layouts for a couple different rounds would have made this more bearable. I'm glad I got to revisit a childhood favorite right here. King's Knight Squaresoft. I honestly cannot believe Square is the one who made this game. This game is best described as a bullet hell. I can see all these icons on screen, but I never actually figured out what most of them do. I see these arrows are like healing items and the down arrows lower your health. Why is this first level so difficult? I can barely figure out what's going on before I die. Oh, and the hit detection is pretty weird when you're trying to avoid enemies walking into you or get the icons. The level progression is pretty weird too. Instead of starting from level 1 after you die, it takes you to the next stage with the next character. The wizard's level is the worst though. I was barely able to ever last more than 2 minutes here. I found caves in all the stages, and somehow his is the only one I was able to defeat some sort of mini-boss. Next is some Barney wannabes level, and why would they make the projectiles blend into the background? Next is who I thought was a girl or something, trying to keep it like Super Mario Bros. 2, but actually, this is a child. His level was easiest by far. During this journey through the NES games, the 1 hour spent with every game, I have felt like there was some sort of progress with these games. Like, with repetition, I could beat these games if I desired. Like, I was getting better somewhat, but not with King's Knight. I did figure out if you focused on staying in the right corner, it was less likely for the bullets to hit you. And sort of the same thing in certain areas on the left side of the screen, but I was only able to get a tiny bit further that way. This game just isn't good, and I'm honestly glad I don't have to play this again after this. Donkey Kong by Nintendo. Yeah, I'm playing a dual cart for this one. It doesn't really change anything except for the menu screen. I am super biased toward this game, I won't lie. I don't know why it is, but I've pretty much always enjoyed this game despite how slow the jump works. The thing that always gets me is when the barrels fake me out. It's frustrating, and sometimes I heard it really does just depend on luck. But I'm a sucker for this game. It's just so good. During this playthrough, I was able to figure out that the 20,000 points mark awards you a 1-up. So that's pretty cool. I couldn't quite figure out what the next mark was, unfortunately. I also noticed that the fire enemies do not change directions on the ladder, so I used that to my advantage once or twice. At some point, I switched to Game B, and I really couldn't see much of a difference. I think it's supposed to make it more arcade accurate, and I will admit, it probably gets harder faster. My final score was in the 50,000s, which is probably the most I've ever scored in Donkey Kong. I tried to beat my own score, but just couldn't. But hey, I'm still proud of it. Donkey Kong Jr., Nintendo. Unlike the first game, I haven't had a lot of time with this one. Enough to know the concept, but not enough to get any good. I honestly don't think I've ever gotten to the second stage until now. Donkey Kong Jr. controls like it takes a bit more Ice Climber's inspiration though. There was one time I was able to jump backwards and it threw me off. And also a time or two I got stuck under a platform in stage 2. Other bits of the gameplay I feel like are a great extension to the first title. This game is definitely harder though. There are some patterns I had to recognize to get anywhere, along with dodging randomness of some of the enemies. Just like before, after about a half hour or so, I put it to Game B, and felt the change right off the bat. There was so much more enemies, and some were much faster. And after a few rounds, I changed it back to feel good about myself again. And when I returned, I actually scored higher than I did in Donkey Kong. Awesome! I can see the appeal, and I do like this game, but I think the first is better by a long shot. Legend of Zelda, Nintendo. Zelda. I've loved this game series since as long as I can remember. I've even beaten this game once or twice. Granted, that has always been with a guide, so it'll be interesting to tack this game going on memory alone. It'll be the closest thing I get to playing this game for the first time anyway. Finding level 1 is easy. I did have a bit of trouble locating where Dungeon 2 is. That's the one that's always been a bit weird to find to me. I remember you almost have to go in a spiral to find it. Maybe that's just my brain though. So right off the bat, I am so used to the Zelda games of the future because I was having a hard time hitting anything with the sword. It's almost embarrassing. I didn't realize how hard the early game was. I just kept dying. I was questioning if this is what it was like back in the day and I was just more patient, or because I was just dying a ridiculous amount. But what was really frustrating was that after I said screw it, I'll come back for it in a second, I still couldn't even get the stupid blue boomerang. Seriously, these guys take 4 hits and these things are throwing fireballs at you. You almost have to get a few hearts before you even enter the second level. Like, how are gamers supposed to even play this? It's sad too because I love this game and I'm always the first to defend it, but I was just not having a good time during the last 20 minutes or so. After this game, I sat down to record the next game and the sound of the NES took a dump. So I had my father take a look at it and he couldn't find anything really to do with it. He did tighten the sound plug-in thing and offered me an NES to borrow, but after plugging mine in, it seemed to have somewhat worked itself out. It's a little finicky though. Ice Climbers by Nintendo. I don't know if you haven't noticed, but I'm pretty much just down to the Nintendo games at this point. And oops, I forgot to press the record on this one, which, unlike last time, is a giant shame and a bigger irritation. On the bright side, I did get slightly further than my first sit down. Ice Climbers is a platformer, but sometimes it feels like it wants to be a puzzle platformer, and sometimes it feels like it wants to bash your face in like an arcade game of the olden years. I don't particularly care for the Ice Climbers, and I remember that from almost a decade ago. But of course I was willing to give it a second try, and I remember just why I don't like this game. It has that older arcade jump for starters, except for some reason it feels more stiff in this game. You need at least a 3-block head start to even make some distance. This game is just not made around how the Ice Climbers control. Things go too fast for how you jump, and even if you time it right, sometimes you clip through the platform. At the end of every stage there's a special stage, and oh, I died. Seriously, I just kept clipping through the floor by the end of these. These are controls you just don't get used to, because the environment around you isn't consistent enough to warrant getting comfortable with them. It's a shame. This game has awesome jingles, but can anybody tell me why the Ice Climbers sound like the Transformers? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, by Ultra. The second in the series. Weird that it's a beat-em-up instead of a platformer. Apparently Ultra makes better beat-em-ups than they do platformers though. Because this game is really good. If you're super into this genre, it might be a little too simple, but it's just simple enough for my liking. And not too complicated either. I don't even normally like these types of game that much. I can only imagine how much fun this would be in multiplayer. Shame this doesn't have multi-tap support because of the 4 turtles in this arcade classic. I don't think the NES could run that though. It seems to have trouble writing all these big sprites on screen at once, which is probably my biggest problem with the game. That, and it doesn't give you like any healing items at all. I made it 4 levels into this game and only found 1 slice of pizza. I was able to figure out that 200 points gives you an extra life, but that's pretty hard to achieve considering the only way to get points is to kill enemies. This game is honestly really good, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. Dr. Mario, Nintendo. This is a classic on the Nintendo. I remember when I was a teenager, a couple of times after I played this game, I would dream that I was still playing it. Even in my sleep, I couldn't escape. At least the music rocks. You just match 4 of the same colors in a row, and that gets rid of the viruses. It's honestly to get hooked on this game, and since there is no lives or continues, you can pick up right where you left off. Sacrificing your score, of course. I think I was tired because I would zone out, make a mistake, and then would take what felt like 10 minutes to fix it. But I finally got past that, and by then, it was the perfect place to end my session. I seriously love this game, and I think everybody needs their emotional support Dr. Mario on standby. Zelda 2 Adventure of Link by Nintendo. Unlike Zelda 1, I haven't played this one too much, and I haven't played it to the end. My old file is even here from when I last played it. Anyway, this game takes on a bit of more of an RPG style, but also decides to be a platformer. Honestly, this concept isn't too horrible. It sort of reminds me of the Mega Man Zero games to that extent. I eventually found my way to the first level, and that's where I found that there are some glaring issues with this game. For one, these Fox guys don't give you any experience points. They only take away. It's like if Slimes in Dragon Quest didn't give you EXP. It's honestly ridiculous. Also, these evil knight guys are way too hard. I could not figure out a pattern on these games, and this is only Palace 1. I do know the jumping trick, but sometimes it doesn't work, so you just take damage anyway. Also, why don't the red potions give you HP? I feel like that's an oversight. This game is way too difficult to have very little health recoveries. And the obvious, when you get a game over, you're sent back to Zelda instead of the beginning of the level. If this game wasn't so difficult, I think this wouldn't have been too terrible of a game. It looked pretty decent too, at least while in platformer form. And honestly, I feel like I had a slightly better time with it than the original Zelda. But then again, I only made it to the end of Dungeon 1, and I didn't even beat the boss in the allotted time. Super Mario Bros. 3, Nintendo. Last physical licensed NES game to go. It also gives me a chance to try this controller I reshelled. In all seriousness, this video was not made in one day. It's been months in the making. I started recording in mid-September and finally finished the last game in December. This is pretty much my favorite NES game of all time right here. I haven't seen all the secrets or anything, but more often than not, I will boot this one up just to play through the first world again. I remember loving the cartoon based off of this game, and cannot help but hear the thwomps. I recommend playing this one on original CRT or playing it on the Switch Online service. I experienced way too much input lag playing from AVI to HDMI. I tested it with a couple of my jumps and it was pretty bad. I kept dying and there were a bunch of jumps I pressed A on, but flew right off the platform anyway. And like, I know I'm not super good at Mario games, but I'm usually good enough to not to die to these idiots in the first and second world. It's either that, or I'm just not used to Super Mario Bros. 3 physics again, and that could very well be the case. I usually adjust pretty quickly though, like I did for the first Super Mario Bros. I will concede that not everything in this game is well designed. During one of my last playthroughs with my oldest brother, there was one stage that wouldn't let you pass without having a particular item, and once you used the item in that level, you might as well give up. But stuff like that only happen every now and again. The most irritating thing is mostly that there's no saving, and when you get a game over, every level you conquer resets. It's an adequate punishment when you get a game over, but I at least wish it would let me replay levels when I beat them. Because seriously, I felt like I couldn't keep a power up for more than 2 minutes or so. But I get why they don't let you. You have that inventory of items you can keep. But normally I try to save it for the last world because I expect I need my stock of power-ups there. I have and always will love the power-ups in this game. I've always loved the raccoon leaf more than the Tanuki suit, and the music is the best it has ever been on the console. I guarantee that there's barely a better game on this system. Castlevania, Namco. Yeah, I'm playing this on my Wii U, but to be fair, I specified I wouldn't be looking at my 3DS virtual console games. Plus, I don't know when I'll ever actually get to talk about Castlevania if I didn't add it here. I hear that this is so many people's favorite game. I won't lie, it looks nice and it sounds nice at least. The theming is timeless, but that's about all this title has going for it. This game just doesn't feel like it was made with Simon Belmont's limited movement in mind whatsoever. There are instances upon instances where you cannot hit an enemy because they just sit where you cannot hit them. Then around stage 5 these Medusa heads shows up and the difficulty rises so much more until you find their pattern. The developers at least made them pretty consistent so there are safe places to stand. At the very least, I got to the boss at stage 9, but I couldn't make it any further. I was just stuck at stage 7 and 8 then for the rest of my session. I was legit getting really angry and just done. I tried playing this game back before I moved, so that would have been around 2020, and I remember this game leaving me a bad taste from then. I was honestly hoping this would rekindle something in me to play it again and finally beat it. But no, I don't have a desire to go back to Castlevania. Wrecking Crew by Nintendo. I think I bought this one because of Metal Jesus Rocks. I can't remember if it was a Hidden Gems video or a buying guide I watched, but I digress. This game is a puzzle platformer, and I honestly like this one. I will say the puzzle progression in terms of difficulty seems a little inconsistent. Like, one of them took me like 10 tries to complete, and then the next one, it would take me 1 attempt. And the fireballs killed my runs more times than I can count, but they are at least very handy for when you screw up a puzzle. This game isn't afraid to let you fail and otherwise self-lock itself if it weren't for those fireballs. This game has a Donkey Kong / Mario Brothers feel, both in graphics and control. I kinda wish there was a jump button though. Don't get me wrong, some of these puzzles might be a little too easy if there were, but I think there would have been a bit more potential in the puzzle designs if the character could. It also might give you a chance not to get nuked by the fireball as well. Even though this game's goal is for points, they do allow you to pick your own stage and even create one. I didn't mess around with that too much, but I think it's still cool that it's here. Legend of Zelda: Curse from the Outskirts by Dr. Mario. The last game I'm going to look at today. If you can't tell already, this isn't a licensed game or anything. This is a mod of the original Super Mario Bros. I actually bought this game back in like 2019 or 2020 or something like that. And this is the first time actually sitting down to play this. So that was a surprise to me. I was personally hoping for a mod of Zelda 2 or something. I read that it was a 2D platformer, so that's where I got that impression. But it's just Super Mario Bros. With Zelda sprites. I don't know what I was expecting, but this just reminds me of some not very good levels in Mario Maker. I feel bad for saying that, but there are quite a few beginner's traps and situations that someone isn't going to figure out. On top of that, this game is pretty buggy as well. There are these ladders in this game, and I kept falling off of them, and once you fall off, there is no getting back on them. I am also reminded of the lost levels on occasion because this game throws situations at you that would be in World 4 or 5 of the original, not in World 1-2. Seriously, this is ridiculous. Honestly, this game does look pretty nice, even though it literally just is Mario and Zelda sprites, but I did notice this weird shadowing behind Link. I don't know what that's about. This music is literally just Super Mario, so there's nothing new going on there. And I think that's very disappointing. I wish they figured out how they could get Zelda music in there. But if you're looking for a challenge, this isn't the worst. I just feel like it needs a little more polish. I was pretty glad to have found a newish game for the NES on eBay, and it be kind of affordable. Buying for these older consoles might still be worth it, because even if you don't like how high the retro prices are getting, you can still find new mods and homebrews for the console. But anyway, I guess what I would say about this entire experience is there are a lot of great games on the NES than I think most people realize. The NES by far is not one of my favorite consoles. It's not that I don't like it or anything. In fact, there's a lot more games on here that I do like because of this experience. There were some real surprise bangers. My favorite would probably be Gauntlet 2 or the second TMNT, but it can also be said that the quality of the games are pretty hit and miss. And I would agree. There are a bunch of games that I just hated and do not care for, but if you're willing to give it a shot, I'm sure you'll be able to find something that you love. I want to hear what you think of the NES and what game on here is your favorite. I don't own every single game, so I'm sure I missed somebody's favorite, and I would love to know down in the comments. I was also thinking about doing this for another console, and I'm curious which one you would like to see next. If you like this video, please click the like button, and if you want to see more videos of this sort, please ignite that subscribe button. I had a decent time making this video, even though it did take away from my backlog quite a bit this year. But, above all, I hope you enjoyed this video whether you do those things or not. Until next time, this has been Axelmyth, and I hope to maybe hang out with you on my gameplay channel, where you can check out all the NES footage from this video right here. See ya!